New axe project I'm planning. I've got this big old Dayton head. I have no idea who made it. I can't find a legible stamp, so I may never know. But this is a fat one. It is 5 pounds, so quite heavy. It's got very convex cheeks, so I really do like the profile. It seems really nice. I'm going to, I don't know if you can see the pencil lines, I'm going to have to reprofile it a bit because it's got the toes a bit worn. So to get it back to its original, something more like its original profile, I'm going to have to take the bit back just a bit. But there's really something to be said for a heavy axe on a short handle, you know, the classic kind of Aussie or racing axe setup. But I want a big old felling axe. I think that's what I'm going to turn this into, something I can, you know, really fall a big tree if I want and buck a big log. So I'm going to put it on a longer handle, and the wood that I'm going to use is rock elm. And I am pretty excited about this, that I managed to get a hold of a log, and I split it up into billets. So I've got something pretty special today. I picked it up. It's a big 40-inch section of rock elm trunk. So the diameter at the stump, and it's about 20 inches. So I don't know, maybe 50 centimeters. It's very heavy. I actually had to split it at the site into 4 just so I could, with help, lift it into the back of the vehicle. But yeah, this is rock elm, so it's basically as tough as other elms, but it's hard. It's one of the hard elms. It's rare, partly because of Dutch elm disease, partly because even before Dutch elm disease, a lot of it was cut, and it just doesn't, you know, reproduce very fast. It only produces seeds once every few years. And we used to have a nice one in our yard that died years ago. So I was very sorry when I was driving by to see this one that I'd known about for a while start to succumb to Dutch elm disease. And so when I saw that, I left a note with the property owner in a town about 10 minutes away from my house, that when they got it cut down, I would be very interested in getting a piece of it. And they were nice enough to do that. So they had it cut down yesterday, and I picked it up this morning. And I got the trunk, the lower trunk section, and I also got this little short section that's actually probably going to be enough for a couple boys' axe handles, or maybe like camping axe. We'll see what I can get out of that. But yeah, it's got one knot in here. It's affecting a couple of the pieces, but otherwise it seems pretty straight grained. Of course, it's incredibly difficult to split because it is an elm, and it is a hard elm at that. But yeah, I am pleased to have this, and I can't wait to make some axe handles out of it. The only thing I'm considering is whether I want to split out some of the billets in such a way so that I actually get some horizontal grain. So basically split them this way so that the axe head goes like that. Okay, quick little diagram on this at the end of this log to illustrate what I'm talking about. This grain orientation people often call vertical, and I would say that it's the handle is tangential to the growth rings on the log, and I also could call it parallel. So the growth rings are parallel to the bit, and this is the opposite orientation. It's radial to the growth rings on the log, and the growth rings are perpendicular to the bit, and people would call this grain orientation horizontal. I think that, you know, I know people don't like that because it's not as strong, but I think it might give a great feel to like a falling axe, and I want to try it because, you know, the old timers, at least some of them, prefer their axes that way. Even some timber sports guys apparently prefer their axes that way, and that's basically the hockey stick direction of grain orientation, and this is the classic hockey stick wood, is rock elm. So, you know, back when you could get it. So as far as I know, it's not typically commercially available, and I'm really lucky to have got my hands on some. Alright, so this is the haul from the rock elm pieces that I got. Most of them look pretty good. There was some crooked ones that I scrapped, but otherwise, yeah, what's here is the good stuff, and it's quite a lot. Yeah, so I try to mix it up. I've got a bunch that are that I split out for having horizontal grained handles, and then I split out a bunch for vertical grain handles because, you know, I just think it's going to work. I think that's a traditional way of doing it, and I think that the rock elm will be strong enough to handle it, and I kind of want to see if it will swing a bit nicer. This is a heartwood section, and I could get more billets out of it from the heartwood part just because of the way that I was able to rive the log. If I made it into billets that are oriented this way with the grain the wrong way, okay, scare quotes there. So the disadvantage of a wrong way billet is so that's having the growth rings go across the eye, so perpendicular to the bit. Is that the growth rings are on a ring porous hardwood like elm and like oak and hickory and ash, but unlike maple, birch, hornbeam, and ironwood, is that in a ring porous species, that means all the blood vessels are concentrated in the early wood, so right there at the edge of the growth ring. And what that means is that that's slightly weaker. So it's slightly more likely to break that way. And so the handle is at least a little bit stronger if it's oriented the other way. But strength isn't everything. And there's also just efficient use of the material. So I think if you're riving, it's often easier to get billets that are already closer to handle shape and more of them if you do it this way. For this log, I did a kind of a mix because I wanted to try different things. But other people have stated a preference for the grain, the growth rings oriented this way, the wrong way, because it gives the handle better feel and flex. And I can't speak to that from personal experience yet because I haven't tried it, but I'm going to try it.
So a quick interjection. This 1865 article for The Canadian Farmer points out a major benefit of riving radial billets for perpendicular horizontal grain handles, which is that handles like this are less likely to warp to the side and be ruined. And this is also what Doug Lee Cook says in the Axe book, and so does Roy Underhill in the Woodwright Shop. So I consider myself to be in good company here.
The handle that I'm going to use as a template is this nice vintage handle. I really like the shape of it, and I want to try and duplicate it. This one is 36 inches. What am I going to do? I might not do 36 inches. I might go maybe 33 inches, but that's what I'm thinking of. Of course, I still have time to change my mind, but that's what's in my head right now. So, however it turns out, I'll show you guys, and you can let me know what you think about it. All right, got my outline traced. Now I'm just going to chop away the waste, which will take a while. You know, I've complained about it before, but this wood is so tough. Like, it's hard enough to work. I hope it's worth it. Now you might be wondering, did I sharpen this? Is this sharp? And the answer is yes and no. The edge is not holding up. So I'm gonna have to put a steeper bevel on this because yeah, it can't quite hold up to what I've got. You know, it's not bending over totally, but it's definitely not really holding a sharp edge. So, all right, since I have a fresh point of comparison, I'm taking advantage of that to do a test of this little axe I just hung. It's a little Hudson Bay. This is also a rock elm handle. This is from a branch from this tree. So once again, I couldn't be too picky with the grain direction, but it's got very little run out, got a little bit of a mix of sapwood and hardwood. And this head is Hudson Bay from England. It's got this EX706 stamp. And I think that means, I will have to double check because it was several months ago that I actually looked it up. But I think it's Spear and Jackson. Anyway, I'll double check. And the X stands for export. So Canada, obviously, ended up here at some point anyway. And yeah, the steel is better than that little man hatchet. I gotta say, it seems to hold an edge better. The grind's pretty similar. Maybe the little hatchet's a little more aggressive. I sort of hope, you know, I used to have a more robust grind on it, and I guess I maybe overdid it when I made it a little finer. So it's a little awkward to carve with this with the long handle, but I kind of want to try it out. This is still like it's a light head. Could have been a hatchet, could have been a full-size axe. I decided to hang it as a full-size axe because I want a nice little bushcraft axe. Despite, you know, the issues that people have with Hudson Bay as being whether or not they're practical, I think it's practical enough. But I'll find out as I use it. So far, so good.
I'm not going to go into too much detail about the handle making process beyond just this initial roughing out the outline with the axe, just because I've gone over it before. I even go over some of the details about making a rock elm handle in my video about the adze. So if you're curious, go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, this video would just be too long. So I'm going to skip the shaping, finishing, and hanging parts.
Anyway, just a little further, and then I'll refine it, the outline a bit with the draw knife, and then I'll establish the center line, and then thin it out, make sure it's straight, because it's not quite straight. So I'll establish the center line and then thin according to that, and that'll be done with the axe too. And then after that, it's rasp and draw knife until I get the head on it and the spoke shave. So my other rock elm project is going to be to rehandle this jersey. So this handle is American elm, and I broke it last fall, and it was sort of an experiment. And I guess you could say it's a failed experiment, although it did last for a while. So I haven't totally written off using white elm or American elm, but it is not as strong or as hard as rock elm. So I'm going to replace it with rock elm, and I'm going to see if I can use this billet. So this is more traditional, or at least more in the recent tradition of grain orientation. So this is sapwood, and the grain is running this way, and so it'll run down the handle that way, so parallel with the bit, which is how it's often recommended and how I usually do it. And one thing with this particular billet is I left myself a little warning while I was drying. Some cracks opened up, so I don't know if that's going to be a problem. I can't see them now. They've closed up since it's been dry. So this has been drying in a shed for about a year, and I'm gonna make sure it dries a bit more before I actually hang it. I'll see if these are a problem. If it looks like the cracks are going to be a problem, I'll just grab another billet because I've got some more. But I don't want to waste any of this rock elm, so I'm gonna try and use it. And yeah, definitely looking forward to getting this jersey swinging again. Here's the 3 axes hung on rock elm. It's all from the same tree, but different parts, different grain orientation. I've got this big 5-pound axe I'm using as a felling axe, so it's got a nice long handle, and the handle is the heartwood, and it's got the vertical or perpendicular grain orientation. Nice little box elder or Manitoba maple wedge. And then I've got this Jersey shorter handle, and it's sapwood. As you can tell, looks very nice. Palm soil there. I think it looks nice. I really like it. Got a white elm wedge and parallel grain orientation, or horizontal. This is a little Hudson Bay from England, export, and it's got a elm wedge too, and this one is mostly sapwood, but it's got some heartwood in it. This is actually from a piece of a branch, and so I didn't have that much wood to work with, so I had to do the grain orientation that I could get out of the billet. So this one is horizontal grain or perpendicular grain, or whatever you want to call it.
Here's all the tool handles that I've made out of the rock elm so far. I've got the 3 axes that I already mentioned, plus the adze handle, and there's a video to go with that. And I've got a mallet there that I made, nice heavy mallet out of one of the knots. And I also made the peg for my socket wedge, but I didn't remember to put that in the photo. Anyway, those are the things that I've made so far, and I'm looking forward to making some other things. Here's a top-down view of the axe handles. They're actually ended up being slimmer than this. After I started using them, I decided to slim down the 2 bigger ones. So they're ended up a little bit more slender than you see here. I find the grain on elm to be quite interesting. I know it's not really known for having really beautiful grain, but I really like it, especially the end grain and the tangential facing grain. It's got a lot of intricate patterns and character. The handle for the Jersey did end up having some issues with cracks. So when I started carving that billet, the cracks did start to appear as I was shaping it. And I basically just had to make the handle shorter until I avoided all the cracks, except for a little bit actually made it just into the top of the eye, but that's it. So yeah, they did end up being a problem, and I'm glad I marked that billet so that I knew that they were there, because they're definitely harder to see after the wood dries out.
All right, so I've decided I needed to thin out the handle, so all my photo shooting glamour shots of this axe don't really show the final version of record. This is it. It's yeah, I slimmed it down, and hopefully it'll chop well and not break. I'm going to test it out. I'm going to chop down a tree. This is a white elm, and it's bent right over sideways, and that happened in an ice storm way back in '98, and the tree continued to grow. So then it had some branches go up, and this tree is actually the tree that the handle for my Jersey, the handle that broke, came from this tree. There's a big branch up there that started to get Dutch elm that I cut off, and then I ended up making a handle out of it. My hope was that it would stop the infection from spreading to the rest of the tree, but I was too late. It didn't work. And so, yeah, the tree has died. Really, the last of it, its last gasp was earlier this summer. So I'm gonna cut it down. I think what I'm gonna try to do is bring it basically towards me, towards the camera here, which is definitely not the direction of its lean, but you know, I don't want to crush the little spruce tree and stuff coming up, and it's just more convenient. So that's what I'm going to try to do, and hopefully this felling axe will be up to the task. It's been a while since I actually swung an axe, you know, not super long, but I hurt myself, and I haven't I got the stitches out and everything, so but I haven't really swung an axe since then. So I'm just going to take it easy. There's a bunch of rocks here. I really don't want to damage the bit on this axe, and yeah, this is not going to be a high performance felling job. I'm just gonna, you know, see how the axe is, get used to it, get used to the longer handle, and take my time.
while I chop down this tree, I want to read some information about rock elm from some old books. Because the old books usually have more interesting passages, and they go on a little longer. I like that. So the first book, and the only one I'm going to do any voices for, is this passage from the 1836 book called The Backwoods of Canada by Catherine Parr Traill. She came from England with her husband and became one of the first Canadian botanists. Okay, so here's the passage. To understand the use of carpenter's tools, I assure you, is no despicable or useless kind of knowledge here. I would strongly recommend all young men coming to Canada to acquire a little acquaintance with this valuable art, as they will often be put to great inconvenience for the want of it. I was once much amused with hearing the remarks made by a very fine lady, the reluctant sharer of her husband's emigration, on seeing the son of a naval officer of some rank in the service busily employed in making an axe handle out of a piece of rock elm. I wonder that you allowed George to degrade himself so, she said, addressing his father. The captain looked up with surprise. Degrade himself? In what matter, madam? My boy neither swears, drinks whiskey, steals, nor tells lies. But you allow him to perform tasks of the most menial kind. What is he now, better than a hedge carpenter? And I suppose you allow him to chop, too. So the snooty lady was actually probably Catherine's sister, just based on the fact that she also wrote books. And her books apparently go on about how miserable life in Canada is, unlike Catherine, who seemed to have a pretty good time here. The basic thing that we learn from this passage is not just that Catherine's sister sounds, for some reason, like C-3PO, but also that rock elm handles were used early on in the settlement period in Canada. A lot of axe handles at this time were homemade. There's a passage in a 1909 pioneer memoir called Bemocked of Destiny, complaining about a lot of things, but one of the complaints is that the downside of being a good woodworker was that the author's neighbors would bring him rock elm staves to carve every time they needed a new axe handle, and they never paid. There were commercial handles. Most commercial handles in Canada and the US were hickory, as far as I can tell. But I found a notice in the Ontario newspaper, the Huron Signal, from 1881, announcing a new axe handle factory that would use local rock elm timber. About this species in general, Julia Ellen Rogers, in the 1917 book The Trees Worth Knowing, says, the rock elm or cork elm chooses dry, gravelly upland with low, heavy clay soil on rocky slopes and river cliffs from Ontario and New Hampshire westward through northern New York, southern Michigan to Nebraska and Missouri. It is more abundant and of largest size in Ontario and in the southern peninsula of Michigan. Its leaf is small, thick, and firm, dark green, and turns to a brilliant yellow in autumn. Its flowers and fruits are borne on racemes, and at any season one knows the cork elm by the shaggy bark on its stout limbs that make the tree resemble a burrow. Rock elm and hickory elm are names that refer to the hardness of the wood. The wheelwright counts it the best of all elms. Compact, with interlacing fibers, there are spring, strength, and toughness in this wood, which adapt it for bridge timbers, heavy agricultural implements, wheel stocks, sills, and axe handles. The name cork elm refers to the corky bark, which runs out in winged ridges even to the twigs. Harold Shorts, in a 1957 U.S. Forest Service bulletin on the silvical characteristics of rock elm, Ulmus Tommasii, wrote, rock elm presumably refers to the physical properties of the wood, which weighs about 44 pounds per cubic foot when in air-dry condition. It is nearly equal to white oak in strength and hardness, and superior to it in shock-resisting ability. Its interlaced fibers, resistant to splitting and durability underwater, led British shipbuilders to export rock elm in quantity in the latter part of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Even hickory scarcely surpasses this wood for toughness, and axe handles made from it were considered tops by northern woodsmen. Donald Peaty, in a 1950 book, A Natural History of Trees of North America, calls it cork elm, and he writes, cork elm, Ulmus Tommasii, other names, rock elm, hickory elm, cork bark elm, or cliff elm. Rocky slopes and the bluffs of rivers, dry gravelly uplands, and heavy clay soils are the habitat of this fine tree, which sometimes rises 80 or 100 feet tall, the trunk clear of branches in the forest for 60 feet, and attaining as much as 3 feet in diameter. If not so graceful as its close relative, the white elm, the cork elm is many-fold more valuable as a timber tree. At an early date, British contractors for shipbuilding firms overseas began to appreciate this tree, which grows plentifully in southern Ontario and southern Michigan. The finest specimens and the largest stand occurred there, and large cuts were made at a time when no other Michigan hardwoods were equally appreciated, and exported through Canada to Britain. There the lumber was received with high acclaim, for even hickory scarcely surpasses cork elm in toughness. With its interlaced fibers, it is almost impossible to split, and splitting was a serious consideration in the days of wooden battleships and sailing vessels. Underwater it is particularly durable. Tradition states, but there are no definite figures to prove or disprove it, that the finest stands of cork elm were long ago cleared out of the country, and, as it is a slow-growing tree, and the country that it chooses to occupy has forever been cleared of its forest, we have never seen a second growth of it comparable to the virgin stands. Okay, so I'm going to do the back cut switching sides so that I'm still using the same hand. But that means that if I don't correct this slant won't match up. So I'm going to try and flatten this up a bit so that the back cut and the face cut line up. At least good enough. Okay, continuing from where I left off, in A Natural History of Trees of Eastern North America by Donald Beatty. Axemen of the old North Woods often preferred the axe handles of cork elm to any other. In the early days of the automobile industry in Michigan, when much wood was going to car construction, large quantities of cork elm were used for hubs and spokes, and in other places which had to take great strain. During the era when most kitchen furniture, including refrigerators, was wooden, this was a favorite, not only because it stood up under heavy usage, but because no matter how discolored the wood became, vigorous scrubbing with brush, soap, and water would always whiten it. Although cork elm is not usually listed as a furniture wood, great quantities have gone into furniture as hardcore stock on which more fragile and elegant woods are veneered. It is used in veneer form itself, not for the visible exterior since it has no beauty of grain. Okay, I would dispute that. But in the form of plywood, sheet after sheet glued together to form boxes or the frames of trunks, which are then covered by leather, cloth, or metal. Because of its stiffness, it has been used for a long time for flour barrels. To one rough usage, however, this stout-hearted tree has never been put surely, and that is a split-rail fence. The steel edge of an axe would turn, the ash handle break, before a sound log of cork elm would permit itself to be mauled. A little bit of hyperbole there, I can say from experience. But the general gist is right on. The book Our Trees, How to Know Them is by Clarence Weed, which is a great botanist name. This was first published in 1908, but I'm reading from the 1946 edition. The rock elm, or cork elm. The very striking peculiarity which distinguishes the cork elm from the other native species is clearly shown in the tree pictured on the plate. Obviously, you guys can't see that. As well as in the branch from which the leaf-bearing twig arises. The peculiar corky ridges upon the secondary branches give the tree a very different appearance from that of any other, and enables one to always distinguish this species with ease and certainty. Now that's not always true, and I'm going to have a video that's going to go into some details about Elm ID. I'm going to put that out at the same time as this one, so if you're interested in those fine details, check that out. Okay, to continue. The tree is especially likely to be found along high riverbanks or in rather dry, rich soils, and is irregularly distributed throughout a rather limited range, extending from Quebec and Ontario in the north, south through parts of northern New England and New York to New Jersey, and west to Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Missouri. According to Professor Sargent, it is most abundant in Michigan and Ontario. In its best estate, the cork elm will bear comparison in size and dignity with the noble American elm, although it lacks some of the grace of the latter species. The tree occasionally reaches a height of 100 feet and a trunk diameter of 3 feet, although generally it is much smaller. The grayish bark of the trunk is marked by numerous vertical fissures, between which are many large loosened scales. The winter buds are hairy, resembling in this respect those of the slippery elm. Well, not in other respects. In regions where the tree is abundant, the wood is used for a great variety of manufacturing purposes, it being heavy, hard, close-grained, and weighing 45 pounds per cubic foot. On account of the valuable qualities of the wood, this species is sometimes called the hickory elm, and on account of the fact that it often grows upon rocky ledges, it is sometimes called the cliff elm. Like the other members of the genus, the cork elm blossoms very early in spring before the leaves push out. But unlike the other species, the blossoms are borne in distinct racemes, a fact which led to the technical name Ulmus racemosa. So that is an old name. It's not the current name, which is Ulmus tommasii. Okay, continuing. These racemes shortly develop into the hairy fruits. These fruits being somewhat larger than those of American elm and smaller than those of the slippery elm. The species has been rather extensively planted for shade and ornament in cities along the Pacific coast. It proved to be one of rapid growth and desirable except for the fact that it sends its roots long distances in search of water, and from these roots come up numerous suckers that were difficult to destroy, especially when the tree itself has been cut down. A writer in the Garden magazine said that on account of gardens ruined by these suckers, the cork elm is no longer planted. In the 1990 textbook, The Silvics of North America, there's a lot of information, including rock elm is considered shade tolerant in the seedling sapling stage and often recovers successfully after long periods of suppression at these stages. As the tree grows older, however, it apparently becomes more light demanding. Overall, the species is classed as intermediate in tolerance to shade. Few species have rock elm's capacity for recovering from prolonged suppression. So suppression here means getting shaded out by larger trees. Continuing. An analysis of 153 trees indicated that a large percentage had survived under suppression for 50 years or more. This capacity makes it difficult to correlate diameter and age. So basically they're saying that some trees that look like saplings or poles might actually be pretty old. This book also notes that small mammals such as chipmunks, ground squirrels, and mice apparently relish the filbert-like flavor of rock elm seed and frequently eat the major part of the crop. So it turns out that rock elm seeds are edible and they taste like hazelnuts. Continuing. Rock elm wood has long been valued for its exceptional strength and superior quality. For this reason, rock elm has been drastically overcut in many localities. The wood is stronger, harder, and stiffer than any of the other commercial species of elm. It is highly shock resistant and has excellent bending qualities, which make it good for bent parts of furniture, crates, containers, and a base for veneer. Much of the old growth was exported for ship timbers. Currently, the highest quality saw timbers is found in north central Wisconsin, lower Michigan, and southeastern Ontario. So that hints at decline. Long before Dutch elm disease became a serious problem in North America after about 1960, many authors were already noting that rock elm was declining. So in 1900, in the book Our Native Trees and How to Identify Them, Harriet Keeler wrote, "The cork elm is perhaps the most valuable tree of the genus, as it possesses all of the good qualities of that family and none of the bad ones. It is strong, tough, easy to work." No, I'm not so sure about that. It takes a fine polish. In short, it is so useful that it is likely to be exterminated. Even earlier, Robert Bell in 1886, in a book called The Forests of Canada, wrote, "In regard to the future supplies of timber which may be available in Canada, the greater part of the white oak and rock elm has already been exported." In a 1918 USDA bulletin called The Utilization of Elm, it says, so USDA there is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It says, "No estimate can be made of the stand of slippery elm. It is cut in the same region as white elm. The trees are scattered throughout the forest, and the lumber is manufactured and placed on the market mixed with white elm. The stand of cork elm is likewise unknown. On account of its limited distribution and the heavy demand upon the supply, it is rapidly diminishing." The U.S. Forest Service bulletin that I quoted from earlier also mentions that because of its scattered occurrence and valuable physical properties of the wood, the species has been drastically overcut in many localities. Currently, the highest quality saw timber trees are found in the mixed hardwood forests of north central Wisconsin and the lower peninsula of Michigan. Now, the Silvics of North America, that textbook, it also mentions that lumber from the other hard elms can be used as a substitute for rock elm. So these species grow in the southern half of the U.S. They are cedar elm, September elm, and winged elm. I'm not familiar with these species, but it's something to think about for anyone with these trees around who is interested in their potential for handles or for other uses. So as far as I know, in general, lumber from hard elms, you can't usually buy it. It's not usually available. And I think that the conservation of these trees is a priority. However, they're all vulnerable to Dutch elm disease, so there are opportunities to salvage lumber in some cases, just like I've done here.
so the weight is all over that way. So I'm going to try and keep this side of the hinge thick to compensate. There she goes. Can you see that it's falling? Yeah. Okay. This is very slow. Oh no. Yes, yes. Oh. Okay. Alright, so the tree's down. I definitely enjoyed swinging this axe. I like the handle. It does have a lot of flex, and that felt fine, felt good. I'm definitely not used to handle this length or a head this heavy. It really bites into the wood, but you know, I was missing a bunch. I don't have like a perfect accuracy anyway, but I feel like it's a little lower. It probably will be until I get a little bit used to this, but yeah, it worked great. It was fun to swing, so yeah, pretty happy with how this one turned out. So I've been cutting this up with the saw, but before I finish, I'm gonna buck a section, and I'm gonna buck a section with this axe with the rock elm grain going parallel with the eye, so I guess you would call that vertical grain. And I'm going to buck a section with the grain horizontal or perpendicular to the eye, the big felling axe here. Now this isn't really a fair test because there's a bunch of variables that aren't quite the same, But I want to see if I can just notice a difference in feel and handle shock with the grain orientation the different way. I mean, I can't isolate all the variables because they're different length handles, but I'm going to try it, buck a notch with each, and just see what I think. Okay, I'm going to try with the Jersey. Now this is near the top of the tree, so it's already pretty dry. Of course, elm isn't flattering to any axe. Miss. But having a dry, tough piece of wood certainly will let me test how the handle feels. This again. Okay. A ricochet there also. Let me tell. All right. Now let's try with the big Dayton. Plus it's awkward bucking on a long handle. That's the way it is. Man, it hits hard. Well, definitely fewer hits. Sorry to get the bottom wood with a long handle too. Anyway, yeah. This feels like essentially zero shock. It's so flexible. Okay, so here at the actual top where it's actually dry, I am getting handle shock. I can feel it. It's not very bad. You know, I gotta pay attention. It's not bothering me, but I can feel it. So, you know, the handle's not magic. Let's try some slow-mo on the other side. All right, so there's the test, such as it was. Not very fair, not very comprehensive. Quite subjective, not quantitative. But all that being said, I've basically tried 2 different handles with the grain oriented different ways from the same tree. There's other differences, like I mentioned. But yeah, it seems at least consistent with a nicer flex and less handle shock from the perpendicular grain oriented handle than from the parallel or vertical grain orientation. So yeah, I'm I'm intrigued. I think there might be something to this, and it would be fun to test it in a more rigorous and comprehensive way. I mean, you can think of tests. The easiest test would be just to get like a completely cylindrical dowel and blindfold yourself, have someone hand it to you in a particular orientation and whack it against something, and then try that a few times and see if you can tell the difference. Yeah, I've got lots of video ideas, so I guess I'll put that in there. But yeah, for now, I'm interested in trying more handles that are like this, so we'll see.